When my grandson told me, "You're on your own, old man," and drove away at the airport, I didn't argue. I just watched his taillights fade. What he didn't know was that the man he'd just abandoned wasn't the helpless old fool he thought I was. And by the time the weekend was over, he'd regret ever underestimating me. The airport smelled of fuel, pretzels, and tired travelers. I stood there with my worn leather duffel, the one my late wife gave me on our 40th anniversary, watching people rush by.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Families reunited, businessmen on calls, children pointing at airplanes. I used to love airports. They reminded me of possibility. But that morning, all I felt was something between disappointment and quiet resolve. My grandson had been distant for a while, too caught up in the new world of money, speed, and social media validation. I hadn't seen him in years, not since his college graduation. Back then, he was polite but distracted, already scrolling through life like it was a feed to swipe past. Still, I was proud. I thought maybe I'd done something right as his grandfather. He'd invited me to visit him after years apart, promising he'd pick me up at the airport and spend the weekend together. "It'll be good to reconnect, Grandpa," he'd said over the phone. I believed him. I even ironed my old jacket, polished my shoes, and packed my best stories. On the flight there, I imagined we'd grab dinner, laugh, maybe watch an old movie like we used to when he was a kid. I was wrong. He showed up late to the terminal, sunglasses on, phone in hand, barely looking at me. "Hey, Grandpa," he said with a forced grin, barely hiding his impatience. I smiled anyway. "Good to see you, kid. How've you been?" "Busy. Really busy," he replied, glancing down at his phone every few seconds. I noticed he had a slick car now, one of those luxury brands that looked like it could fly if it wanted to. He'd changed. The little boy who once begged me to build model planes with him was gone, replaced by someone who measured worth in status and followers. We didn't talk much on the short drive. Every time I tried to start a conversation, he'd answer with a distracted "yeah" or "uh-huh" before jumping back into whatever group chat or email seemed more important. Finally, he pulled up in front of the terminal again, but on the departures side this time. "Wait, this isn't your place," I said, confused. He sighed. "Yeah, listen, Grandpa, change of plans. Something came up with work. I can't take you right now." "That's all right," I said softly. "I can wait here until you're done." He shook his head. No, you'll have to figure something out. There's a shuttle or whatever. You'll manage, right?" I stared at him for a long moment. "You're leaving me here. You promised you'd take me." He looked annoyed, like I was an inconvenience. "Grandpa, you'll be fine. I'll text you later. It's just, I've got important people to meet." Then he laughed awkwardly, patted the steering wheel, and muttered, "Find your ride, all right?" before driving off. I stood there, the wind catching my jacket, his words echoing louder than any roar of a jet engine. Find your ride. The casual cruelty of it hit harder than he'd ever know. I wasn't angry, not yet, just disappointed, deeply. The kind of disappointment that sits heavy in your chest, reminding you how easily people forget who helped them take their first steps. I found a bench and sat down, watching the planes lift off one by one. The duffel at my feet felt heavier than usual, maybe because I knew what it represented. Everything I'd built, everything I'd kept hidden from him. He'd grown up thinking his grandfather was just an old retired mechanic who tinkered with engines for fun. He never knew about the years I spent building something much larger, something that had quietly changed the industry he worked in. While I sat there, a young man in an airport uniform approached me. "Sir, are you waiting for someone?" "No, son," I said kindly, "just catching my breath." He smiled politely and moved along, probably assuming I was another old-timer with nowhere to go. But I had a plan forming. You see, what my grandson didn't realize was that the reason I'd agreed to visit was because I had business nearby, business that would soon make headlines. A few months earlier, I'd been asked to consult for a renewable energy startup. They wanted to honor me publicly for my early inventions in hybrid engine design, something I'd kept out of the spotlight for decades. I'd politely declined the fame, but they insisted I attend their new facility's ribbon-cutting ceremony that weekend. They said, "We owe it all to your work, sir. Please let us celebrate you." So I came, quietly, humbly. My grandson thought he was dropping off an old man with nothing left, but he'd just abandoned the very person whose name was about to headline the event his own company was sponsoring. I took a cab downtown to a small hotel, checked in, unpacked, and sat by the window watching the city lights. I wasn't bitter. I'd lived long enough to understand that pride is a disease that blinds the young. But a small part of me hoped that when the truth came out, he'd finally see me not as a burden, but as the man who had once paved the road he was now speeding down. As I turned off the lamp that night, I whispered to myself, "You'll find your ride soon. Just not the way you think."
The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds of my small hotel room, painting the walls gold. I woke early, the way I always had back when I ran my own workshop. Old habits don't fade, they just wait quietly for purpose to return. I made a pot of coffee with the hotel machine, the kind that never tastes quite right, and stared at the skyline beyond the glass. My grandson's office was out there somewhere, in one of those sleek towers gleaming in the morning sun. I wondered if he'd even remember I was in town. Probably not. I spent the day preparing for the evening's event. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Hybrid Energy Research Center was scheduled at the downtown conference hall. It wasn't exactly my scene anymore. Bright lights, cameras, executives shaking hands. But it mattered. It wasn't about recognition. It was about legacy. The designs I'd sketched on napkins decades ago had evolved into technology that could change the way people thought about transportation. I wanted to see that progress for myself, not for applause, but for peace. When I arrived at the venue, the lobby buzzed with excitement. Journalists chatted near the entrance, technicians adjusted lights, and a few familiar faces from the old industry days waved me over. "It's been too long," one of them said, gripping my hand with a grin. "We heard you'd finally decided to come out of hiding." I chuckled softly, just curious to see what the new kids have built. They led me inside, past banners that read, "Innovation through Integrity." The irony of that slogan didn't escape me. So much of what I'd witnessed in my career had been about ego and power. That's why I'd retired early, quietly. The work had always meant more to me than the spotlight. I was taken backstage to meet the event coordinator. She was young, sharp, and polite, clearly stressed but holding herself together. "It's an honor to have you here, sir. We'll introduce you just after the CEO's opening remarks. You'll be our keynote guest of honor." "Guest of honor," I repeated with a small smile. "Haven't heard that in a while." She smiled back. "You deserve it." As she left to handle another crisis, I glanced at the program in my hand. My name, my full name, was printed in bold across the second page. Underneath, a line read, "Former founder of Northline Hybrid Technologies, innovator of early sustainable engines." It felt strange to see it there. Most people thought the company's success belonged to a group of young investors who had taken it public years ago. I'd stayed silent, content to let others have the fame, but my work had never really left the stage. Hours passed and the seats filled. Executives, engineers, students, and reporters gathered, their voices blending into a soft hum. I stayed behind the curtain, listening to the speeches. The CEO took the stage first, thanking the sponsors and introducing the new facility. I recognized the name of one of the sponsoring firms. It was my grandson's employer. My stomach turned with a mixture of irony and sadness. He had no idea that his own company owed part of its success to the man he'd left stranded at the airport the day before. When the MC finally called my name, the audience rose in polite applause. I walked out slowly but confidently, gripping the edge of the podium. For a moment, the lights blinded me, but I could feel their attention, their curiosity. The cameras clicked. I was told to give a speech about innovation. But what I really want to talk about is humility. The room quieted. You see, people think invention is born from genius. It isn't. It's born from failures, hundreds of them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's born from people who were told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or modern enough to keep up. It's born from stubborn hearts that refuse to give up when everyone else walks away. I didn't plan my speech, but the words came naturally. Maybe because I wasn't really speaking to the crowd, I was speaking to someone else, someone who wasn't there but needed to hear it. I started designing engines. I didn't do it to make money. I did it because I believed people deserved better. And when others took credit or tried to bury the old names, it didn't bother me, because truth always finds its way back. Applause followed, gentle at first, then stronger. Afterwards, people lined up to shake my hand, thank me, take photos. I smiled, signed a few programs, and excused myself early. The noise was too much. I needed air. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. I found a bench near the fountain and sat down, letting the sound of water calm my mind. I checked my phone. No messages. Not from my grandson, anyway. But one notification caught my eye. A company-wide post from his firm's social media account, showing a photo from the event. Honoring the pioneers of hybrid innovation. Thank you for inspiring our future. My name was tagged beneath it. I imagined him scrolling through his feed, stopping at that post, realizing who he'd left behind at the airport. It would hit him eventually, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but the truth was on its way to him, and it would sting. Back at the hotel, I took off my jacket and laid it across the chair. My old hands trembled slightly as I poured a glass of water. Pride and sadness mixed inside me, two sides of the same coin. I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. I wanted him to learn that life has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. As I turned off the lamp, the city lights flickered outside the window. Somewhere out there, my grandson was probably laughing with friends, unaware of the wave about to crash through his perfect world. I whispered into the dark, "You'll find your ride soon, kid. It's just coming a little later than you expected."
2 days passed before the phone finally rang. I was packing my suitcase, ready to check out of the hotel when the screen lit up with his name, Ethan. For a moment, I just stared at it, the sound of the ringtone echoing in the quiet room. Then I answered. "Grandpa?" His voice was hesitant, almost small. "I see you finally remembered my number," I said, my tone calm but edged with something heavier. He exhaled hard, the kind of sigh people give when guilt sits heavy on their chest. "I saw your picture online. The company posted about the event. I had no idea you were the guest of honor. I feel terrible." I sat on the edge of the bed. "You didn't know because you didn't care to ask, son. You were too busy assuming I was just some old man slowing you down." "I know," he murmured. "You're right." There was silence on the line for a long moment. Outside, cars passed, horns blaring faintly in the distance. I could almost see him on the other end, sitting at his office desk, the realization finally sinking in. "Listen," he said finally, "can I see you before you leave? Please? I'd like to make it right." I thought about it. I didn't need an apology to feel whole again. I had long ago made peace with how people misjudge others. But perhaps he needed this moment more than I did. "All right," I said. "Meet me at the old North Line facility tomorrow morning, the one on Crescent Avenue." He hesitated. "Isn't that the place that shut down years ago?" "Exactly," I said. "See you at 9. When I hung up, I felt an odd sense of calm. The North Line facility was where it had all begun, and where it had all ended. Dusty floors, rusted tools, faded blueprints still pinned to cracked walls. The building had aged, but it still held the echo of the past, the hum of ambition, the smell of oil and steel, and the sound of dreams being built piece by piece.
The next morning, I arrived early. The gates creaked as I pushed them open. Sunlight cut through the broken windows, painting long streaks across the floor. I walked past the old assembly line where the first hybrid engine prototype had been built, the same one that the world had mocked, called impossible. And yet a decade later, the same design, refined and rebranded, powered some of the world's most efficient machines. At exactly 9, a car pulled up outside. Ethan stepped out wearing his company jacket, looking uneasy. He glanced around the place as if it were a graveyard of forgotten ideas. "This place is... wow," he said quietly. "You really worked here. For 30 years, before your company was even an idea." He ran his hand along one of the old metal tables, brushing away the dust. "You didn't know you founded Northline. Dad never told me much about it." I smiled faintly. "Your father and I had our differences. I chose work that didn't pay much at first, and he thought I was wasting my time. Maybe he wanted to protect you from following in my footsteps." He looked down, guilt still heavy in his expression. "And I judged you for having nothing to show. I thought success was about money, titles, new cars." "Most people do," I said gently. "That's why I didn't blame you. The world teaches us to measure worth by what's shiny, not by what lasts." We walked deeper into the building. I stopped at a rusted metal cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in an old piece of cloth, was a stack of yellowed blueprints. I handed one to him. "This," I said, "is the first draft of the hybrid drive system your company uses today. It was built here by a team that believed in something no one else did. I didn't patent it under my name because I didn't care who got credit. I just wanted it to exist." He unfolded the paper carefully, his eyes scanning the faded lines and equations. His hands trembled. "This is your design?" "Yes. And every time your CEO gives a speech about innovation, he's unknowingly honoring a man who once welded those parts by hand, right here in this room." He didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was the soft rustle of paper and the creak of the old roof above us. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Just remember this moment the next time you think someone's value comes from what they have instead of what they give." We walked out of the building together, the morning sun bright on our faces. Outside, near the gate, he turned to me again. "Grandpa, I want to make it right. I'll tell my boss, my colleagues, everyone what you did. People deserve to know." I shook my head. "No, Ethan, that's not the point. Let the work speak for itself. It's already changing lives. That's enough." He frowned slightly. "But don't you want credit? Don't you want people to know the truth?" "I want you to know the truth," I said, my voice firm but kind. "Because someday when you're in my shoes, you'll understand that legacy isn't what people remember about you. It's what they continue because of you." He stood there quietly, nodding, his pride slowly being replaced by gratitude. "You're right," he said softly. "I've been blind. Thank you for still meeting me after everything." I patted his shoulder. "We all make mistakes, son. What matters is what we do after we see them." He helped me carry my suitcase to the car. Before getting in, I turned back toward the old building one last time. The cracked walls seemed almost alive in the sunlight, as if the ghosts of every dream I'd ever built were watching us, smiling. As the car drove away, I glanced at Ethan beside me. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't distracted. He was simply there, present, thoughtful, quiet. For the first time in years, I saw the spark I'd been hoping to see all along. The next chapter of our story wouldn't be written in machines or blueprints, but in understanding. And that, more than anything, felt like the true invention of my lifetime. Weeks passed after that meeting at the North Line facility, and something had shifted between us. Ethan started calling every few days, not out of obligation, but out of genuine interest. He'd ask questions about the early days, how we built things, what mistakes we made, what lessons I wished I'd learned sooner. Each conversation was a bridge, slowly rebuilding what pride had once burned down. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from someone else. It was the CEO of Ethan's company, a man I had known years ago when he was just a junior engineer, back when he still called me sir and asked for advice about torque ratios and thermal efficiency. "John," he said, his voice warm with surprise, "I heard you've been reconnecting with your grandson. That's good to hear. Listen, we're hosting a corporate summit next month. We'd like you to attend as our honored guest." I chuckled softly. You know I don't do public appearances anymore." "I know," he said, "but this one's different. We're unveiling a new model, and truth be told, the core design still uses your old blueprints. I think it's time people knew who made the foundation of what we've built." I hesitated for a moment. My days of speeches and applause were long behind me, but something about the way he said it made me reconsider. Not for recognition, but because it might be a chance, for both me and Ethan, to close the circle. A month later, I found myself in a crisp black suit, sitting in the front row of a grand hall filled with screens, lights, and sleek prototypes gleaming beneath the stage lights. The banners on the walls read, "Innovation through Legacy." Ethan stood on stage beside the CEO, nervous but proud. I could see his hands tremble slightly as he held the microphone. "Good evening," he began. "Before we unveil the new design, I want to share something personal. For years, I thought success was something you could measure in numbers, titles, or the shine of your shoes. But recently, I learned that true success is built on the backs of people who never cared about being seen, only about building something worth leaving behind." The crowd was silent. You could feel the weight of his words. Then he turned toward me. "There's a man in this room who taught me that lesson not by preaching it, but by living it. I'd like to welcome my grandfather to the stage." The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. My heart beat loud in my chest as I stood and made my way up. Ethan met me halfway, eyes glistening, and together we stood before the crowd. "I didn't come here for recognition," I said once the room quieted. "I came because there's something I've learned after a lifetime of work. You can build machines, empires, or fortunes, but if you forget the people behind them, all of it turns to dust." A few heads nodded in the audience. I continued. "This young man beside me once thought his grandfather was a burden. Truth is, I probably was in some ways. But what he didn't know is that I once thought the same about my own father. The cycle doesn't break until someone decides to listen." Ethan's hand tightened around the microphone, his voice steady this time. "And I'm listening now, Grandpa." There was laughter and a few tears from the audience. Even the CEO looked moved. Cameras flashed, and for a brief second, I caught sight of myself on the big screen. Old, yes, but not forgotten, not invisible. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed around, asking questions, wanting to know the story behind the story. I kept my answers simple, humble. All I ever did, I told one of them, was care more about the craft than the credit. When we finally escaped the crowd, Ethan and I walked outside into the cool night air. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. "You know," he said finally, "I used to tell people I didn't have much family. I was embarrassed to talk about you because I thought you didn't fit the image I wanted to show the world." I smiled faintly. "And now?" He looked at me with something deeper than guilt, something like pride. Now I realize you're the only person I want to tell the world about." I chuckled, a sound that felt lighter than it had in years. Well, don't go turning me into a social media story now. I'm not sure I'd survive going viral. He grinned. "Too late. They're already posting about you. Hashtags and all." "Wonderful," I said dryly, but there was a warmth in my tone I couldn't hide. "Just don't forget to spell my name right." He laughed, and for the first time, it wasn't awkward laughter or forced politeness. It was real, like the kind of laughter you only share when the weight between two people finally lifts. We stood there for a while, watching the cars glide by and the city pulse with life. Then he asked softly, "Grandpa, what's next for you?" I thought about it. For years, I had been content to fade quietly into the background. But now, maybe the background wasn't where I belonged. Not yet. "Maybe," I said, "I'll write a book. Not about machines or success. About people. About what it means to be forgotten and how it feels to be remembered again." He smiled. "If you do, I'll be your first reader." "And your last editor, I hope not." He laughed again. Then, after a moment, he said quietly, "I'm sorry for leaving you at the airport." I looked at him, really looked at him. The man he was becoming, not the boy who once turned his back. And I said, "You didn't leave me, son. You just didn't know the way yet. But you found it. That's what matters." He nodded slowly, and the truth in his eyes told me he understood. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window and looked out over the glowing skyline. Somewhere below, my grandson was probably driving home, maybe thinking about everything that had happened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because I had proved anyone wrong, but because I had finally been seen. Not as a failure, not as a relic, but as a man who had simply kept going when the world stopped believing. Months rolled by after that night, and though life settled into quieter rhythms, everything felt different now. Ethan visited almost every weekend, sometimes with his fiancée, sometimes alone. He'd bring coffee and pastries, always insisting he pay, and we'd sit on the porch, talking about things that didn't have dollar signs or deadlines attached. One morning in late spring, he showed up with something under his arm. An old leather-bound photo album. "I found this at Mom's house," he said, setting it on the table between us. "Thought you might want to look through it together." I smiled. Haven't seen that thing in decades. We flipped through the pages slowly. The crackle of the plastic sleeves sounded like whispers of time. There were photos of my wife and me when we were young, building our first home with our bare hands, covered in dust and hope. There were old company events, the factory floor, newspaper clippings from back when I used to get local recognition. Ethan stopped at one photo, me standing beside a prototype car with a handful of workers, grinning proudly. "You look happy here," he said softly. I was. That was before the investors pulled out, before the plant shut down. But you know something? Even after it ended, I never regretted those years. We built something good. That's more than most people get to say. He nodded thoughtfully. It's weird. When I was younger, I thought happiness meant having more. Now I'm starting to think it's just about having enough. That's the trick. Enough isn't something you find. It's something you decide. For a while, we sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the trees. Then he said, "Grandpa, I've been thinking about starting something on my own. Not for profit, but a mentorship program. For kids who don't have anyone to guide them into tech fields. Kind of like what you did for your crew back at Northline." I raised my eyebrows. surprised and proud all at once. "You want to help build dreamers?" "Yeah," he said, smiling. "I guess I finally get why you did what you did." I felt my throat tighten slightly. "Then you've already done what I hoped you would. Taken the lesson forward." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Well, I had a good teacher." A few weeks later, he invited me to speak at one of his mentorship events. I almost said no. Public speaking had never been my favorite thing, but I could see in his eyes that it meant something to him. So, I agreed. The event took place in a local community center. The audience wasn't business executives or investors this time. It was teenagers, wide-eyed, eager, some nervous, some cocky, all of them with that restless energy that reminded me of my younger self. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped up to the small stage. The microphone squeaked, and a few of the kids snickered. I smiled, waiting until the room quieted. I'm not here to talk about success. I'm here to talk about what happens before it. The part nobody likes to mention. The doubt, the failure, the long nights when you think you've made the biggest mistake of your life. But here's a secret. That's where the good stuff starts. That's where you find out who you really are. The room was silent, their attention locked in. When you fall, don't waste time wondering why. Ask yourself what it's teaching you. Because one day, you'll look back and realize that every closed door was pointing you toward the right one. After the speech, several students came up to thank me. But what meant the most was watching Ethan in the back of the room, arms crossed, smiling, eyes full of pride. The same man who once left me stranded at an airport was now helping others find their direction. After the event, he came up to me and said, "You did great, Grandpa. You really did." "Not bad for an old man, huh?" I said with a grin. He laughed. "You're not old, you're timeless." That made me chuckle. Careful, or I might start believing that. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You know, I used to think I needed to impress people. Now I just want to make them proud, especially you." I looked at him for a moment before saying quietly, "You already have, son. More than you know." From then on, our relationship wasn't about guilt or making up for lost time. It was about living the time we had left. We built new memories. Fishing trips, backyard barbecues, late-night chess games where he still couldn't beat me, but tried anyway. Each moment felt like a small miracle. Proof that second chances can be stronger than first impressions. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in gold and amber, he said, "Grandpa, I'll never forget the day at the airport. It used to haunt me. But now, it reminds me of how far we've come." I smiled, looking at the fading light. Life has a funny way of teaching us.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.